they get motivated every now and then, but like the motivation isn't enough to help them take risk. You have to just accept that you're gonna be uncomfortable. You're never gonna be comfortable doing something you haven't done before.
All right, today we have a really fun podcast for you. Our guest is Alex Murillo. So Alex, he's pretty impressive for being a young man. Is in his, I'll call it mid-20s. Does that make you feel better? That's better, right? Mid-20s.
Closing in on 30.
So we have a couple of businesses. We have 10 properties, and we are just on a really cool path. So thanks for coming on, Alex.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I think it's fun to talk with people who kind of know how it works, and we can kind of compare struggles and wins, right? I think that's one of my favorite things to do now.
Absolutely, I love it. So you're just a really impressive person. You're really, it's funny the way you look at risk. It's like, I think when I was younger, I was always so scared about taking risks, and I didn't quite understand a lot of it, and so I think that kind of held me back. And I see some of the things that you do, and you'll analyze it, and then you just kind of go for it. And I love that about you, but where does that come from?
I honestly don't know, because my family is pretty risk averse. When I look at my siblings or my parents, I don't really remember anyone in my family taking any big risks or starting businesses really or anything. My dad maybe a little bit. He had an insurance business. But my parents were always like, go to school, get your college degree. Because they immigrated here from Central America, and that was like, my mom got a degree, and it was the best thing ever for her. So I really don't know where it came from. I just felt like something clicked at some point in my mind when I was 22 or something like that, where it just seemed like I didn't have anything to lose.
So you went the total opposite then of what you were taught as a kid. You were taught, go to school, get a good job, do that because it worked well for your parents.
Yeah, I think part of it was just seeing, I got to see a lot of mistakes be made by my parents, by my siblings. And I remember them always being worried about money. My parents would argue about money. My siblings still to this day, they're stressed about money. And they're worried they don't know how things work. They don't know what to do next. They're scared to lose everything, and they're always thinking about that. So at some point I started just going through content like a 20-year-old does, I guess.
Yeah, YouTube, every 20-year-old.
YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, Bigger Pockets, things like that. Things that were just kind of opening me up to a world of like abundance, I guess.
So that was kind of your teacher just trying to figure out, okay, I don't know what I want to do, but I know that I don't want to struggle with money. I don't want to have those conversations. And I can't learn that from home, right? Mm-hmm. This was the same problem I had as a kid. Can't learn that from home. So let me watch some videos. Let me get on Instagram. Like, what are other people doing that are making money?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say, so I don't want to say I completely didn't learn anything from home, because I have one experience with my dad, actually, that I remember very vividly.
Okay.
We were in a grocery store, and he didn't have any money on him. I don't know, he might not have had any money. I don't know.
Okay.
I was just a kid, and he's like, hey, do you have any cash so I can buy these groceries? Maybe 10.
Okay.
And I would save money. I would pick up coins from parking lots, and I would just save them. And I had cash on me, so I was like, yeah. So I lent my dad cash, and he told me, he's like, lend me this money for these groceries, and I'll pay you back a quarter in interest every day that I don't pay you back. And I was like, okay, sure. So I lent him the money, we bought the groceries, and every day I remember asking him, like, hey, like, I would add up the total. I was like, whoa, like, you owe me more now today than you did yesterday, and it started to kind of make sense to me. And I remember that very vividly. But it wasn't until my 20s that I started kind of wondering what other path there was other than just getting my degree and making maybe $20 an hour somewhere.
I find that those types of experiences as a kid can just be so strong because you're sitting there and the person that you look up to, right, is out of money. Mm-hmm. And then you as a kid, like, I don't know what to do. right? And so then as you get older and you start working, that's probably why it stuck out so strongly to you, because you're thinking, I never want to have that experience. So there's got to be a different way. There might be some things that I've learned from my parents and they're great, but there might be some other things that I need to learn somewhere else.
Right. Yeah, that's literally what it was. So I started kind of turning to, they're pretty famous now, people like Brandon Turner from Bigger Pockets.
Okay.
He wasn't super popular, big at the time, but he was still one of the podcast hosts. And I just remember seeing a video of him on YouTube come up on my feed while I was working a graveyard shift while I was in school. And he was just talking about how he achieved financial freedom through real estate. And I was like, it kind of blew my mind, I guess. I was like, what do you mean? What does that mean? You mean you don't have to work? Is that what that means? And that's exactly what it meant. He was talking about, I had so many properties. They spit off this much cash flow, so my expenses were covered. So I could choose at that point to do whatever I wanted. So that's kind of where I started. That's where I kind of dived into the education of all this stuff.
So you saw that, and that you were like, okay, this is the path that I can avoid having that experience where we're at the grocery store and I got to ask my kid for money. So is that when did you start looking for places to buy, or did you go out and get your real estate license at that point in time?
So at the time I was in school, going to college, getting my degree in psychology.
Okay.
I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I was working like 3 jobs at the time. I had a graveyard shift, working in a group home, and I would go straight from my graveyard shift and I would go over to my next job, which was helping kids with autism, something like that. And I also was doing landscaping. So I was just like working a ton, and I don't know, I didn't feel like I was getting anywhere. And it was kind of stressing me out. So at that point, I started just, what did I do? I binged probably for about 4 or 5 months. I binged podcasts, YouTube videos, all the Bigger Pockets.
I love it.
Info.
Just trying to soak in everything you possibly can.
I was just consuming a ton. I wasn't necessarily taking a ton of action because I wasn't quite sure what that meant or what that looked like. And it got to a point after 4 months, I felt like I'd kind of listened to everything I possibly could. And I said, I don't think I'm going to learn anything else unless I try to buy a house.
Were you working the 3 jobs during that time when you were binge watching?
Yeah.
Okay, so your life was like 3 jobs, consume content as much as I can, and then, okay.
Then I'd go home and tell my wife about it, and she would be like, oh, okay, like whatever, you know?
Okay.
So I remember I kind of decided, I was like, okay, I'm going to stop listening to podcasts now. I'm going to stop consuming, and I'm just going to start looking at houses on Zillow. So I went on Zillow. I found the 2 lowest price houses in Cedar City, Utah at the time. And I drove over to them. I drove past them probably 2 or 3 times. I reached out to a couple people to ask them their opinions on the house, you know, like people do. Like, you don't know what to do. You don't know you can just go walk through it without paying anything with the realtor. And somebody actually told me it was a bad deal. I asked them, what's your opinion on this house? It's the cheapest house in Cedar City right now.
You were how old during this time?
22.
Okay.
22 about. So I reached out to a person that I thought knew about real estate on Bigger Pockets, one of the forums that they have. And they're like, oh, it's a bad deal. There's no good deals in Utah. You can't invest in real estate in Utah. You got to look in the Midwest. That thing's not going to cash flow. And I was like, well, that's stupid. I can't just, this is the only thing I could ever possibly buy right now. So I kind of just disregarded him.
Okay.
And I called the realtor. I went and saw the house. And she's like, hey, do you want to make an offer? And I was like, yeah, sure. Let's make an offer.
You're like, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm just going to go for this.
I was just going for it, yeah. So we made an offer. I didn't know how it worked. I didn't know we needed earnest money. She's like, hey, we need like $500 for earnest money. And I was like, oh, okay. I think we had maybe $5,000 saved. Correction, my wife had $5,000 saved. I didn't have much.
Okay.
So Chloe had like $5,000 in her account, and I was like, okay, we can do that. So we put the earnest money down, and then we just started going. Just my realtor told us what to do next. Okay, we got to get a loan. Call a bank. So we called a bank, and they're like, hey, we'll give you a loan. Which, looking back now, I'm amazed that they did that, because I wasn't making more than like $15 an hour. My wife was working 12 hours a week, making $12 an hour as a CNA, but she had just gotten into nursing school, so I think they liked that, because they're like, oh, she's going to be a nurse, something like that.
The thing that I love with the story, though, is like you jumped in and then you took a step and then you had to figure out the next step. See, sometimes people just do the analysis paralysis, right, where they just try to figure everything out before they take a first step. Zig Ziglar says it best, like you're waiting for all the lights to be green before you go into town. Mm-hmm. And so I love that, but you just kind of jump in, you're like, okay, I've got this one step that I've got to take, which was submitting an offer. Cool, I can do that. And then the next one is like, earnest money, what's that? Mm-hmm. Okay, cool, we can do that. Now I got to go get a loan. Okay, where do I go from there? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's awesome, and that's a good lesson for people. Like you don't have to know all the steps in order to make something happen. Mm-hmm. Just take the first one, and you're going to learn so much from taking that first one.
Yeah, most people, they get stuck in maybe they'll drive past the houses, or they'll get stuck in the scrolling Zillow phase, just like, oh, this might be a deal, and they just look at it and they wish and they wonder, and then they don't do anything, and they move on with their life, right? So it's like I learned pretty early on that you're gonna learn everything by just doing.
Yeah, gotta take action.
I'm gonna make 10 mistakes and learn 1 or 2 right ways to do it by the time somebody tries, by the time somebody takes action, mm-hmm. right? So it's like it just accelerates everything. Just doing.
Yeah.
That is awesome. That's such good advice too. Take action. That's very important there. Yeah. So that was the first house that you bought. Now you're like the ultimate house hacker. Do you want to explain really quick kind of what you've done there? Because I think the house hacking, what you've done with it is amazing, in that keeping your living expenses low, and that gives you capital to do all of these other things. Mm-hmm. Mostly the American way is spend everything you have. Let's have a really cool, flashy car, right, and mm-hmm. and the big house and things like that are flashy, so we can feel successful. And you're looking at it saying, I want to actually deploy that capital towards buying more properties, mm-hmm. and that's going to get so much more over time. So maybe you can. So explain that really quick, the house hacking part of it.
Yeah, the cool thing about house hacking is, especially as a 20-year-old, looking at 20% down on a house, any house really, especially in Utah, is going to be super intimidating, right? 20% down on a $400,000 house is $80,000. Mm-hmm. So as in your early 20s, making $15 an hour, like to save up $80,000 to buy your next house, that's like, it's impossible. It's
For
like,
sure.
It's just out of reach. But house hacking, you only need 5% for the next house, right? So that mm-hmm. comes down to $20,000.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, like that's a lot more doable. I could save $20,000 in the next few months, or in the next year, whatever. That first house, I actually didn't house hack it. That was the original plan, but it needed a lot of work. So I spent about a year fixing it up myself. Like, I took out a wall. I overdid it, actually. That's one of the lessons I learned. I wanted to make it like the nicest 3-bedroom townhome in Cedar City, which was just pointless now that I look back on it. But I changed the floor out. I didn't know how to do any of this stuff either. But I knew I wanted to fix up the house. I knew it was going to cost too much for me to pay somebody else to do it. So I was like, hey, I think I have to do it myself. Mm-hmm. So at that point, same thing. I didn't have the skill set to do what I needed to do next. I actually went and I asked my ecclesiastical leader for a job, because he was a handyman in Cedar City and he knew how to do everything. I stumbled upon him working on a house that he was fixing up for a fix and flipper, and I asked him, like, hey, can I come work with you for a little while so I can learn how to do this stuff? And he was like, yeah, absolutely. Like, he was super grateful for the help.
Awesome.
So I went and worked with him for a few months. I learned how to do drywall. I learned how to install floor. I learned how to install outlets and lights and all kinds of stuff. So I kind of like would work with him during the day, then I'd go home and I would work on my house. And I'd wake up early the next morning, work on my house, go back to work with him for a while.
And you lived there at the time, right?
We were living there, yeah.
Yeah. How did Chloe feel about that?
Oh, she hated it. Chloe was actually awesome. She actually helped me. She hated it, but she never complained.
Yeah.
But I knew she hated it.
Yeah.
So that's
it's tough living in a construction zone.
Maybe she knew what the bigger plan was, right?
I'm
it's like we've got to sacrifice a little bit now to have a different life later.
I'm super grateful for her for how supportive she's been, actually. Like, my wife has been, like, nothing would have happened if she wasn't as supportive as she was. So she would help me install floor. She would help me do everything. We didn't have any furniture, so we spent a year, we would sit on a bucket and a little step ladder.
Did you at least put a pillow on the bucket?
No, I would just sit on the bucket and be like, hey, this is taking so freaking long.
That's amazing, though, because like you were willing to sacrifice for the bigger picture, right? See, a lot of people just aren't willing to sacrifice. They want to be comfortable now, and you have to experience a little bit of pain now in order to have that later on. Yeah, so that's great. Like, hey, I can go out and I can buy a cool car and I can buy cool furniture and then rent the house, or I can say screw the other things and I can just go buy the house and sit on a bucket.
Yeah. I mean, some people call it, bucket list. Yours was bucket life.
Right. That will lead to me owning 10 properties plus, right? We're still adding to the portfolio, and we still have plenty of time to add in the 20s.
Yeah, we were locked in because at some point, this is the way I sold all these ideas to Chloe, because she's never listened to podcasts or anything like that. It was never interesting to her. She likes reading fantasy books and things. So the way I got her on board was I just showed her, like, I did the math and I said, hey, like, if we own this house for 20 years, look how much the mortgage is going to be paid down. Look what it's probably going to be worth, assuming houses go up in value every year. And it was like, it's a lot of equity, right? Mm-hmm. And she's like, oh, that's pretty cool. And we only spent $4,000 like to get into this house, right? For the down payment. So after that, she was just like, she just was sold. On board. Yeah. She just trusted me, which was awesome.
That is awesome. So your last house that you moved out of, that one you did house hack, right? So you lived in a smaller portion of it and you rented the larger part of the house out.
Yeah. Correct. After that first house, we house hacked. We've been house hacking ever since.
Okay.
Yeah. So the house we just moved out of, it was a 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom house in Santa Clara, Utah. Uh-huh. And I was looking, by this point, I kind of knew what to look for a house hack, right? You kind of look for layouts that are a little weird, or you look for as many bedrooms as you can squeeze into the house.
Okay.
So this house had a lot of bedrooms. It had a funny layout, so it had 5 bedrooms on one side of the house, and then there was this big, on the other side of the house, there was this big open room that they were using for arts and crafts or something, the previous owners. And I was like, oh, this is like, it almost felt like an addition. This can easily be separated to create a mother-in-law unit, like a studio or a 1-bedroom apartment, in addition to the 5-bedroom house on the other side. Mm-hmm. So we moved in. I put a door in to separate the 2 sections. I added a little kitchen, and we moved into that mother-in-law apartment, and we rented out the 5 bedrooms of the rest of the house. So we had our own private space.
That's amazing.
But they were paying 80% of our mortgage about.
Okay. That's amazing. So you're living in the smaller part, you're renting the bigger part out. I mean, the house is appreciating. You've got the mortgage, right, is paying down the house. So you're building this equity, and then you're keeping your living expenses down low, and then that gives you additional capital to keep doing other things. So you house hacked from the first house you didn't, and then after that you learned house hacking, and then you started doing that, and that helped you acquire more properties.
Yeah, that's our primary strategy, or has been at least. So the second house, once I'd finished remodeling that first one, we rented it out, and we came across the next one, and we moved in, and I said, and the payment was like $900, something like that, which was it felt like a lot to us at the time. Right now, a $900 payment would be like freaking awesome. But at the time, I was like, dang, $900, that's, that's steep. I don't know how I felt.
Every time you buy a house, it always feels like that.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
It always feels like it's just a little too much. It's never like, oh, this feels perfect, it's easy. No, it always feels like a little bit of a stretch. At least everyone I've ever bought.
Yeah, it felt just like pushing it.
Yeah.
So I told Chloe, I was like, hey, this is a high payment. Like, I'm not sure how we're gonna do this. And she was like, yeah, you're right. We should try to, and we agreed we should try to rent out the other bedrooms. So I had a friend, conveniently, we're in college, so we had an abundance of friends that needed places to stay for the next semester. So we found somebody to rent one bedroom. I found somebody to rent the second bedroom. It was a 3-bedroom house, and then we were living in the master bedroom. So they were each paying like $300 or $400 a month. So it was almost covering our mortgage. And so we were living like that for a few months, just with my roommates. They were actually friends of mine. So I loved it because I was like, dang, I have my wife and my friends. Everyone's here. This is great. And then at some point, another one of my friends reached out to me and like, hey, like, I heard you have the house that you're renting rooms out. I need a place. And I was like, oh, yeah. Like, I didn't even think about it. I was like, yeah, I have a room for you. So he moved into the master bedroom, and I told Chloe, I was like, hey, like, we don't have a room anymore. I just rented out our room.
So this was the room that you were staying in?
Yeah.
And then you rented it out? Okay.
Mm-hmm. So again, she never complained. She was like, oh, okay.
Where are we going to sleep? Oh, I don't know.
Let's figure out where we're going to sleep. So we had a pull-out couch in the living room.
Oh, my God.
And that's where that was our room. And we shared a bathroom with my friends. So we were making money to live in the house. We just didn't have our own room.
Okay.
Small detail.
I love that, though. It's funny because I tell the story about a house that I owned in my 20s, and it had a mother-in-law apartment, and I had that rented out, and I had all the rooms, and I was actually getting paid $500 a month to live there.
Yeah.
Nobody knew it at that time, but it was kind of like that. Like, you have all kinds of people there, and you're a little bit uncomfortable, but you just, you have the bigger picture in mind. You're gaining equity. You're paying the mortgage down. So we're going to sacrifice a little bit so that later on, we can have some equity there. And I think I ended up selling that house a decade later and made like $180,000 or something on it.
Yeah, it's just.
But so I always try to talk to people that are in their 20s, and it's like, let go of the cool car, let go of all the fancy stuff, and just focus on that and house hack. All your buddies are going to want to live with you anyways. When you first move out, they're going to want to live together. Everybody's going to live together anyways, because you typically can't quite afford your own place, right? And so you might as well have them pay you rent. And sometimes I tell them, if you need to, like, get grandma to co-sign and have everybody paying you rent, and then just keep that house for a decade, and it'll be worth quite a bit. But you're going to be a little, I guess when you're early 20s, and if you're single, you're not going to be uncomfortable. If you're married, that's going to be a little bit different. But that's still amazing, the sacrifice that you were willing to put in to create, and that's why you're on this path.
Yeah, it was like. I didn't mind it, me personally, because again, I had all my friends in the same house. Yeah. We would all hang out in the evenings and like play games. It was way fun. I loved it. And
you're living on the couch. You're sleeping on the couch.
You're living on the couch.
That's the opposite,
that could
right?
get a little tricky.
Normally it's like the friends crash. Can I crash on your couch? And you're like, I'll crash on the couch. I own the house.
Yeah.
You can take the bedroom.
Yeah.
Did you put up like privacy curtains?
No. So actually, we at some point we put a tent in the backyard.
This story just gets better. I love it.
I knew there was more to the story.
We put up a tent in the backyard to have like privacy.
You're like, honey, let's go out here for
and
our date
Chloe, and because my wife Chloe was working graveyard shifts, so she would come home to try to sleep. At the same time, everybody was getting up to try to go to work or go to school. So they would wake her up. So she's like, I need somewhere quiet to sleep during the day. So we put a tent in the backyard.
That wasn't cold in Cedar?
It was in like the spring, summertime.
Isn't that terrible?
So it would get hot, actually. Yeah. So she would lay out and sleep in the tent until it got too hot. And then she would come inside onto the couch by the time everyone was gone.
Wow, what a saint.
I'm like looking back and I'm like, geez, that.
The thing that's
really
important
sucked.
there is her like willingness to do that is what has led to all of this stuff that you guys are creating. And both of you are okay with it together, but that's what led to you creating. If she didn't want to do any of that, you probably would own a house, but you likely wouldn't own the other 10. Mm-hmm. And you probably wouldn't have bought the business that we're going to talk about here in a minute, right? Because you would have less cash. You wouldn't have the ability to go out and do those things. So, I mean, that's amazing.
So how many are you at currently?
I think, if I remember right, I sent you a message beforehand. I think it's like 10 properties now and 13 or 14 units, individual units. We just sold a 4-unit building, so it was as high as like 18 or 19.
Wow.
But now we're back down. So that's where we're at. And it was through house hacking, right? So
this all happened within 5 years, really, right? Like 5 years is not a lot of time for us, probably for you. But it's not a lot of time, but you went from where you were 5 years ago to creating this, where you've got this empire that's being built. If you look back when you were in your early 20s, did you think you'd be here?
Yeah, actually, I did. Okay. I just had this
vision,
irrational confidence, I guess, in myself. I felt like I was invincible and could do anything, and everything was going to work out. That was kind of my mentality.
And that's what led you to just take action. Like, I'm going to get rid of whatever fear there is, and I'm just going to take action, and then I'm going to take action before I feel ready, which is huge, and I'm going to figure it out along the way.
Yeah, you have to get over it at least a little bit. You're going to be uncomfy. You're going to make a lot of mistakes. But the mistakes we made, you just kind of, okay, like, this mistake is outweighed by all the wins, right? Yeah. So we've done enough to warrant this mistake, or we've done enough to learn how to not do this again. So we don't take the mistakes too hard, I guess.
Yeah, my favorite quote is, once you become fearless, life becomes limitless. And I feel like this is a great example of, just conquering those fears and, just having this limitless possibility in your life. So that's really awesome.
Yeah, people, they're just scared, and I understand that, right? Like, it's, with real estate especially, these are big purchases. Like, this is a lot of debt in most cases to take on in hopes that it pays off at some point, right? But it's just, I don't know, when every time you look at any house, even if it's not a good deal right now, you look at it in 10 years, you're like, oh, dang.
Yeah.
That's a great deal. Like, at some point, it's going to be worth it.
That house that I mentioned to you a moment ago that I house hacked and I paid, or I made $180,000 on, I bought it just before the peak of the last crash in 2008.
Oh, wow.
And so, yes, right before, like 6 weeks before what was considered the peak, and then everything just really crashed at that point in time.
So you rode it out.
I did. It was a really good lesson for real estate because I got to determine when I sold it. As long as I was in a good position, I could determine when I sell it. If I was in a position where I had to force sell it, which is what happened to a lot of people, then that was a different story, right? They lost money because the value of that thing plummeted. But because I was house hacking and I was getting paid to live there, I'm like, I'll just ride this out. I can stay here forever. That's fine. And then later on it came and I was able to sell it and make a good chunk of change on it. So it was great.
That's really cool, yeah, because that's one of the biggest fears people tell me is like, oh, what if the market crashes? What if the market crashes?
Just ride the wave.
You have options. If the house is paying for itself, if the expenses are covered, then the value can do whatever it wants. It could go down to zero. Eventually it's going to go back up, but you're still not having to it's not as much of a burden if it's rented or if you're house
Right.
hacking. You know, it's
And sometimes you have to make a sacrifice, right? Like having somebody move in.
mm-hmm.
Maybe you're sleeping on the couch or in the tent.
Right.
That might be a little more extreme, but it can be done, right? I think a lot of people are so afraid of making mistakes that they are afraid to live and actually do some of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And then all that happens is time passes and we're in the same spot
yeah
20 years later.
Yeah, time passes. No, they haven't done anything. They get motivated every now and then, but like the motivation isn't enough to help them take risk. You have to just accept that you're going to be uncomfortable. You're never going to be comfortable doing something you haven't done before.
Absolutely. I love it. I want to talk about, so earlier this year, you decided to buy a business. And I remember talking to you and you're all of a sudden like, hey, I have this landscaping company under contract. And I was like, wait, what? What are you doing here? and it makes sense now when you talked about how, you know, when you bought your first house and you're like, I submitted an offer and I'm going to figure the rest out. So you got this, you found this business. It was already generating revenue. You liked it. You got it under contract. And you're like, okay, I've got this thing under contract. I got to figure out now how to actually buy it, right? Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, how did you figure out, like, first off, how did you find the business? Because I think there's two ways with business, right? You can start one from scratch, mm-hmm. or you can find one that's existing. And the ones that are existing, they're not always listed. You can't just go to the biz, buy, sell and look, right? There's sometimes you come across somebody and they're just done. They just mm-hmm. want to be out of the business, right? And that could be an opportunity for you. So mm-hmm. how did you find that business?
Yeah, so I found it just on Facebook.
Okay.
Facebook Marketplace. So I had decided that I wanted to buy a business. And I wanted to buy one that was simple enough that I could understand it, or that I had experience with in some way, shape, or form. So landscaping was kind of on the top of my list because I'd done it before. I kind of knew how it worked. And even if I didn't, it's really simple business, right? Mm-hmm. Like cutting grass or whatever. It's just anyone can figure it out. So I found it on Facebook. The owner posted it for sale. And I messaged him with the full intent of making an offer at some point, right? So he's like, yeah. So I went and met with him for lunch, and I was like, yeah, I want to buy this business. Let me figure out how to buy it, right? I gave him earnest money, $5,000, and then I had to figure out, okay, he didn't want to sell or finance it to me, so I had to go find a way to get a loan from a bank. Mm-hmm. So I just called banks and told them like, hey, I have this business under contract. I know SBA loans exist. I don't know how they work. I don't know how you qualify for them, but I think this might be a possible candidate for one. So I ended up working out an SBA loan with a bank.
So you had it under contract, and you had kind of an idea that SBA loans exist. You just didn't really know much about them. You're like, I'm just going to start calling around to banks and saying, hey, I've got this under contract. Here's the purchase price. What mm-hmm. do I do? What do I do next?
Mm-hmm. And chances are they looked at all of the properties you have, and they're like, oh, yeah, you have plenty of collateral. We're good.
You'd think it would be that easy, but honestly, that was the most uncomfortable loan process ever. It took so long, and they kept asking for things, but you just kind of keep doing what they ask until it moves forward, right? So.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is, I think for what the business generates, you really didn't have to put a huge amount down, mm-hmm. right? What was your down payment on it?
Yeah, so SBA loans, you can purchase a business using an SBA loan with 10% down. So this business was on the smaller end.
Okay.
It was like $150,000, I think, mm-hmm. is what the purchase price was. And it was generating about that much in revenue.
Okay.
So
for $15,000
$15,000
for $15,000 down, you can buy a business that's generating $150,000 in revenue.
Mm-hmm. In revenue.
That's amazing.
Yep.
And see, if you look at somebody like today, like they're trying to decide, do I start a business or do one, right? To build a business from scratch, especially if you've never had one, right? To build it up to $150,000 in revenue can take some time, and there's a big learning curve there. So when you can just go and find somebody that, hey, I want to sell my business, and you can put up 15 grand, that's much less expensive in some cases. And then it's probably generating more than that in profit already. So your cash on cash return is amazing.
Yeah, we've made more than the down payment back in cash flow after all expenses, labor, and everything.
Yeah.
And debt service. We've made more than the down payment back in cash flow, right? So it's like after everything, all the expenses, labor, everything, it's cash flowing around $2,000 a month.
Okay.
Oh, that's great.
Right, which for a $15,000 initial investment, that's like,
Yeah.
You don't get that with real estate.
No.
So
No, you're
that's what's
150% return cash on cash.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so looking back, I made a lot of mistakes on this one. I didn't know how to do due diligence on a business. I didn't know what questions to ask. I didn't know anything. And I actually brought on a partner, a good friend of mine who I trusted and knew was a good worker. He actually brought the down payment. So he funded 15 grand for the down payment, and then we're partners on the business. And I did that partly because I was just like, I felt like I was in over my head, and I just wanted some support.
Yeah, that's a good lesson though, right there. So you found this business, you figured out what the financing is, you figured out the capital requirements, you went and found somebody else to put that money in so that you can be into it. I mean, zero.
Yeah, so I didn't have any
money. And now
money.
you're a partner on this business. That's incredible.
Yeah, so now I've got a partner, and it's been great. Like we can share the workload. Our workload is pretty minimal now, but initially it was very high because there weren't any employees really. It was just the owner, and he was doing everything. He was just in his 60s, and he was ready to retire. So when he left, we had to replace him with an employee, but it was kind of a job for a few months, right? Like I had to go out and trim hedges for a couple months, you know.
Okay.
But yeah, it's great. You bring somebody in who you trust, who knows capable, who knows the industry, right? Like the friend I brought on, he had a lot of experience with landscaping too. So he was able to help me solve problems that I wasn't quite sure where to go next with.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's helpful too. If you just, whether it's a partner or not, but going out and finding somebody who's already done it, and if they can go alongside you and kind of help you through it, that can be huge. Because you might come across some challenges when you have that business, and you're like, I have no idea what to do here, and then all of a sudden, that can be helpful.
Yeah, and we both have other businesses too. Like I still invest in real estate, and he does other stuff. So it's like when I am unavailable to solve a problem with the landscaping business, and he can step in and do that, and vice versa. So it's kind of like just in the last year or so is when I started becoming open to partnerships and bringing people in and borrowing money and things like that, because it kind of shares the burden a little bit.
Sure.
And it gives you people that you can kind of lean on, because everyone's now in the deal. Everyone's now invested, and everyone wants it to succeed.
Right. No, that's awesome. That's awesome. Has having the business or operating that type of business, was it harder than you expected?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, it was. Again, I didn't do my due diligence very well. So I trusted the word of the guy that sold it to me on a lot of things. Just little things. He told me, oh yeah, all my customers love me, And I was like, oh, awesome. That's great to hear, But in reality, they all kind of hated him.
Okay. That's good advice. So if you're going to buy a business, like, do some due diligence. Make sure the customers
talk to your customers.
Yeah, talk to the customers. Everyone needs to know that a sale is happening before it happens, and they have to be okay with that. Because if they're not, and then they find out a sale happens, they're like, "Oh, we hated that guy. This new guy's probably not going to be any better. So let's just move on or whatever."
Did you lose some clients when you?
Yep.
Okay.
The very first day, we lost one immediately. The guy who sold it to me, he sent out an email to all his customers and said, "Hey, I'm retiring." And one of them responded immediately, "Okay, we're finding a new landscaper."
What did you do then with that?
I was just like, I couldn't really do anything.
Okay.
I just took the hit, really. I tried to maintain a positive relationship with that customer. It was actually a property manager who it was an HOA community that we were maintaining.
Did you get it back?
No, but I have a relationship with that company now, and it's not like, we moved on. I guess it's fine.
Yeah.
So, yeah, stuff like that we didn't see coming, I guess. So,
Right.
The rest of the customers, as soon as that happened, I was like, oh, shoot, like this could be really bad. So I spent a lot of time over the next few months. I was like, I went to their houses. I introduced myself. I did extra work for them. Like, we made sure everything was looking really great and that they were happy with us, and let them know, like, hey, I'm not at all associated with the previous owner. This is a new company now, new ownership. So that's kind of what we had to do, and thankfully we maintained enough of the previous clients to stay in business, and then we added on new ones as we went too.
Yeah, I think that's a good lesson, because sometimes you can have this expectation of what's going to happen, and then you do it, and all of a sudden everything just falls apart. And part of owning a business is you have days where you're like, everything just fell apart. I have no idea, right, how we're going to possibly move forward with this. But you put your head down and you think, and you figure out a way and you make it happen.
Yeah, the only way out is through.
Oh, I like that.
So you have to just do it. My wife can attest. Sometimes when I get stressed out, I'll kind of sit there, or I'll lay on the floor. That's one of the things I do. I'll go in a room by myself, I'll lay on the floor, and I'll just kind of sit in the stress for a minute. And then I'll get up and I'm like, okay, like, what's the first thing I have to do? And then I just work on that first step.
Yeah, that's great.
Right.
So I gotta take a second, I gotta breathe, I gotta release this, and then I gotta take action.
Yeah, so she kind of knows how it works now. So she, like, the other day I was laying on the floor. And she's like, oh no, something's wrong.
She's like, oh boy.
So she comes in and she's like, okay, like, what's the first step to moving forward? Right? Like, how can I help you do that? So again, very thankful for my wife's support, but she's like, so I told her, I was like, okay, yeah, we need to do this first. So we got up and went and did that, right? And then once you do the first thing, you have momentum, and that's how you kind of just keep going.
Absolutely.
I love it. If someone were watching right now and they were, let's say they're in their 20s, they're you 6-7 years ago, what would you tell them? What advice would you give them?
Speed to action is far more important than anything else, right? Like, there's a lot of people that are exactly where I was in their early 20s. Maybe they're in school and they're doing exactly what I was. They're binging content. There's just more content now than there was then. Even it was only 4 or 5 years ago. So they're just binging all this information, all these shiny objects, possible ways to get rich, to make money, but they're never going to learn anything unless they try to do it, unless they take a risk and take action. Right? So
I like
that would
that.
be one thing.
Yeah, so you can learn a lot from those things, but you're going to learn more by taking action. But you still kind of have to have that as a baseline to kind of have an overall understanding of how some of it works. But there's no way around taking action.
There's no way around
That's it.
Yeah.
You're going to learn so much more, and you're going to fall a little bit.
Yeah,
And that's okay. It's just like when you bought the business, day one, you fell, you stumbled. But you laid on the floor for a minute. And then you got back up and you're like, okay, take action again, because that's what's worked. And then you turned that around into something that is profitable. Because some people would have just said, oh, maybe I was right, it is too hard, I shouldn't have done this. And then they would have just let it go and the business could have failed. But instead, where you thought through that and you thought, okay, I don't want to lose another customer, I'm going to go shake all their hands and make sure everything is really good and they're happy, and then that's going to help it, and then we can build it back up.
Yeah, I think honestly, like, as an entrepreneur, we all have great ideas, but the thing that sets you apart is when you can execute, right? you have to execute your ideas. You have to take action, right? It's just, if you don't do that, then you have nothing. Like, you just have this vision. So that's awesome.
Yeah. It's like, I mean, I could come up with all these other pieces of advice, like don't try too many things at once. Don't have shiny object syndrome. Don't try this. Don't try that.
Squirrel.
But yeah, don't do that, right? Like, I did that, and I made a lot of mistakes. I've tried other businesses. I tried starting an e-commerce store once. I tried doing something else at one point. I tried publishing books at one point. But in reality, rather than telling somebody to not do these things, I would just say, like, take action on them. Learn whether you want to do them or not, whether they work for you or not. Because by doing it, that's the only way you're going to know. So I had to try all these things to learn, okay, none of this stuff works. I'm good at real estate. I'm going to do that, right?
I think the other lesson that you give that is just so powerful is the partner that you choose is so important. Because if you choose wrong, right, that's going to make a big difference. If you don't choose that person that was willing to sacrifice with you and go through those hard times, you may not get to the great times, and you may have hard times your entire life, right? And so to be willing to sleep on a couch and be willing to sleep in a tent and do all of those things in order to build what you guys have, that's incredible. So I think that's another important one for, if somebody's in their 20s, like, choose wisely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because it makes a difference on what you're gonna become later on.
Yeah, no, Chloe has been immensely powerful, right? She even found a deal through a coworker at one point because she made it known that we were buying houses, right? So that's how we found one of our houses. Was one of their coworkers told us they were selling, and we ended up buying that house. So she stepped in with both feet with me, and we have struggled and grown together, which has been really awesome.
That's amazing.
Great, yeah.
So with the 10 houses, you've got the flipping business, and then you've got the landscaping business. What does a typical day look like right now?
So a typical day looks like, are
you crazy busy, like running all around, or
no?
Is it a little more, relaxed, or you got some things in place? And
yeah, for the first few months with the landscaping business, I was extremely busy because I was going out, I was learning the accounts, I was working with different employees because we went through a couple employees to find ones that we trusted and that we liked. But now, as far as the landscaping business goes, I wake up, my day-to-day is maybe I'll send a text in to the crew and just kind of check in, see how things are going, see if they have any concerns or questions. But for the most part, we have somebody that responds to all the texts and emails. If something breaks, irrigation, sprinklers, whatever, we have somebody that responds to those messages, sends somebody out to fix it. So I still do the invoicing, but that's only once a month.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll send out invoices once a month. It takes me maybe a couple hours, and that's pretty much it. So I really it doesn't take much of my time at this point.
That's awesome. So now you're freed up to go out and maybe look for other businesses.
Yeah, pretty much. And
now you're going into it knowing more. Like, hey, let's make sure the clients are happy. Let's make sure those things
exactly
are going well before we jump in and buy a new one.
Mm-hmm. And real estate, I'll kind of, again, most of my actual involvement is I can squeeze into like an hour of time or a couple hours tops, where I'll put it in my calendar. I say, okay, I have 1, 2, 3 deals currently right now that need attention to get to the next step. So what do I need to do at this moment to move the needle forward on each of these deals? And I'll pick that one item that I have to do, and I'll put it all into like an hour or 2 hour period and make sure I get all those things done during that time. So the real estate really doesn't take that much time, and that's kind of the nature of real estate. It's kind of slow a lot of times, especially if you're getting loans or whatever. It's kind of a lot of sitting around, a lot of waiting. Mm-hmm. So for the most part, my time is pretty open. I spend a lot of time at home.
I like how you do the business, because like you could go and you could work in the business and obviously you would make more, right? Mm-hmm. But your time's very valuable to you, so you're willing to make less as long as somebody else runs it, and then that frees up your time. And you can go and create other businesses or do whatever, look for other deals, properties, flips, I mean, whatever. You've got a lot of free time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because to be honest, like another thing I have learned in the last year or so is that I don't necessarily love real estate or landscaping. I don't really I mean, I have some passion, I have some knowledge about it, but it's not what gives me life.
Okay.
Right? What gives me life is spending time with my family, with my wife. We're about to have a baby, and I'm like, dang, I want to hang out with my baby every day. That's that gives me life even thinking about that. So all this other stuff, it's just like, if I'm making less, but I can be at home with my wife, like that's what the end is, right? That's all of the rest is just providing me time to be able to do that.
So it sounds like anything that you build, you kind of have that idea in mind, like, hey, if I've got to jump in and get dirty for a minute and make it happen, I will. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to do that all day, every day. I want to do it for a few months, get some things put in place, and then I want to be able to hand that off and have somebody else take it and run with it. Mm-hmm. And then I can move on and have my time back.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. So it's that would be the other thing. Like, people get so caught up in making more money, but then all this time has passed. Maybe you've made a lot of money, but how much closer are you with your family? You know, how is your relationship with your wife? How is your relationship with your friends? And I really value those relationships, so I'm in constant communication with friends of mine, and so that's why we do everything else, you know.
Right. And I think, though, the way you're setting it up, I mean, in the end, it'll allow you to make more money. You're just not using your time to do it. Sometimes we can get bogged down spending so much of our time on one thing, right? Mm-hmm. But the way you're doing it, and you're having multiple streams of income, but you're setting them up in a way they don't take a lot of your time. So you can go out and you can buy another business now. Mm-hmm. And you can find something that now you know a little bit more. Well, now maybe I'm willing to spend, instead of $150,000, maybe I'm willing to spend $500,000, and I can put 10% down on that. Mm-hmm. And find a partner on that, and then this is one that generates $10,000 a month, and I can jump in the weeds for 3 months and get some things in place, and then I can back off a little bit, and then I can get back to what this is, and I can just keep repeating that.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. But for somebody that hasn't ever done it before, like the landscaping business, if you just really need income, you're not making money, you need active income to pay your bills or whatever, like, you can buy a landscaping business. If I really had to, I could jump in, tell my employees to take some time off, and I could go in and I could make, $10,000 a month just doing landscaping.
Yeah.
Maintenance.
You have some options there.
Right, a full-time job. That's which is most people's life, But I just value my time more now, so I don't, I'd rather spend that time with my wife and make $1,000 instead of 10. I think that's worth it to me.
Right. That's awesome, Alex. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it, man.
Thank you.
I'm excited to see what the future brings to you. I think you're just on an incredible path.
Yeah, thank you.
So,
I appreciate you guys.